Hello and welcome to Let's Crack UPSC CSC English channel. I am Rajshekar Reddy, faculty for current affairs. To tell something about myself, I have been teaching current affairs for the past 7 years and I have cleared the civil service examination in 2014. I'm a BTech computer science graduate from JNTU Hyderabad. You need to download and subscribe to the Unacademy Learning app. By doing so, you get a number of advantages. So, what are the advantages that one gets by downloading and subscribing to the Unacademy Learning app? So, you have daily live classes. So, you have live classes on a daily basis. This is very important. And in these live classes, you can chat with your educator, ask questions, engage in discussions, and also answer polls all while the class is going on. So, you can carry out a number of activities during the class. So you can chat with your educator, you can engage in discussions, ask your doubts, and answer polls all while the class is going on. The courses that are available on the Unacademy app are structured in nature. They deal with the syllabus of the UPSC Civil Service Examination comprehensively. The Unacademy platform also provides for a number of live tests and quizzes by top educators of our country. And most importantly, you have unlimited access to the content on the Unacademy platform. So you can watch these videos any number of times without any limit. So Unacademy is the best platform for online civil services education, and it is also relatively cheap. India's best educators are teaching on the Unacademy platform, and you have a number of different courses that have been designed by India's top educators. There are a number of subscription options that are available. You can see here that you can subscribe for Unacademy for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. The best subscription option is the 24-month subscription, which gives you a 67% discount. So you get a 67% discount by subscribing for 24 months. You get an additional 10% discount if you use my code RRUPSC. So please use this code RRUPSC for getting an additional 10% discount. The final transaction cost will be 57,600, and you can convert this transaction into no cost EMI. So this is the beauty of the Unacademy learning platform. You can convert the entire transaction into no cost EMIs, and you can extend the no cost EMI facility up to 24 months. So this is about the Unacademy platform. So let us start with today's lecture. So as you all know, we have started a new series uh, called Top 200 Topics in Current Affairs for Civil Services Prelims 2020. So this is a series which is specifically targeted at the Civil Services Prelims examination as well as the Civil Services Main Examination 2020. We have already dealt with nearly 40 topics, so we will be dealing with the new set of topics in today's class. So what is this topic? So the first topic for today's class is Darfur genocide. So we have the following set of topics: Darfur genocide, UGIRS, Hong Kong basic security law, International Tiger Day and Tiger Reserves, Hope Mission, Tiananmen 1, Perseverance, and Boko Haram. So these are the 8 topics which will be dealt in today's class. So what is the first topic? So the first topic is Darfur genocide. So there is an area called Darfur, and this area is located in Sudan. So this is a large territory in Sudan, and it is one of the most backward regions of Sudan. And this area has been witness to something called a genocide since 2003, and for the past 17 years as many as 480,000 people have been killed in this region. So this is one of the most troubled regions in the world. So recently, some 60 people belonging to the Masalit community, so 60 persons belonging to the Masalit community were killed, and this has again brought this issue of Darfur genocide into the limelight. So we will look at what is Darfur, what is the genocide that is going on in Darfur, and what measures have been taken by the United Nations and the African Union to deal with the Darfur genocide and to ensure that peace prevails in Darfur region. So let us see here. So this topic falls under disputed territories and conflict zone. This is a very important topic for your civil service examination. So a commonly asked question in the prelims examination. So you can be asked either 1 or 2 questions in the prelims examination on disputed territories and conflict zones in the world. So this is a conflict zone in the world. So recently more than 60 people have been killed and another 60 injured in fresh violence in West Darfur region of Sudan. So this conflict has taken place in the Western Darfur region. So more than 60 people have been killed very recently. Around 500 armed men attacked Masteri town. So this is the place where the killings have taken place. Around 500 armed men attacked Masteri town and killed 60 men, women and children. And these people belong to a community called Masalit. So the victims are members of one community called the Masalit community, which traditionally inhabit the Darfur region. So recently, more than 60 people have been killed and another 60 injured in fresh violence in West Darfur region of Sudan. Around 500 armed men attacked Masteri town, targeting members of the local Masalit community, looting and burning houses and part of the local market. So they have burnt houses and they have looted the economic resources of this region. So this actually has brought into focus the Darfur genocide once again. So before understanding the Darfur genocide, you must know what is genocide. So genocide is the intentional action to destroy a people, usually defined as an ethnic, national, racial or religious group. So I am repeating once again. So genocide is the intentional action. So the word here that is important is intentional action. It is not accidental, it is intentional. So genocide is the intentional action to destroy a group of people. So it is aimed at destroying a group of people, either whole or in part. If a group of people are destroyed either whole or in part, and these group of people must have a similar trait. So what is the trait here? That is, they should belong either to the same ethnicity or same nationality or same race or same religion. So they should have a similar trait, and this is the reason that which is important. So Darfur is also a place where we are seeing genocide. So genocide is the intentional action to destroy a people, usually defined as an ethnic, national, racial or religious group in whole or in part. Examples of genocide include the Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide and the 1980 Bosnian genocide, Anfal genocide, Darfur genocide and the Rwandan genocide. So there have been a number of genocides that have taken place in the past. The most infamous among them is the Holocaust, in which the Nazis exterminated the Jews. As many as 60 lakh Jews have been killed, and it is said to be a perfect example of a genocide. Darfur is not far behind. Darfur genocide here refers to the current mass slaughter and rape of Darfuri men, women, and children in Western Sudan. So Darfur genocide refers to the current mass slaughter and rape of men, women, and children in Western Sudan. The killings began in 2003 and became the first genocide of the 21st century. Unrest and violence persist even to this day. So these killings began way back in the year 2003 when the local African groups revolted against the government, and the killings are continuing even to this particular day. The genocide, who is carrying out the genocide? The genocide is being carried out by a group of government arms. So this is very important. So the genocide is carried out by a group which is armed by the government and funded by the government. So the genocide is being carried out by a group of government armed and government funded Arab militias known as the Janjaweed. So you must remember this name. So you may be asked a question in the prelims examination: who are the Janjaweed, who are often in the news? So the genocide is being carried out by a group of government armed and government funded Arab militias known as the Janjaweed, which loosely translates to devils on a horseback or rapid support forces. Janjaweed are also called rapid support forces, and these people are carrying out the genocide. And on the other side, we have the Darfuris. So the Janjaweed systematically destroy Darfuris by burning villages, looting economic resources, polluting water resources, and murdering, raping, and torturing civilians. So these Arab militias are involved in burning villages, looting economic resources, polluting water resources, and murdering, raping, and torturing civilians. These militias are historic rivals. So who are they fighting against? So these militias are historic rivals of the main rebel groups, the Sudan Liberation Army and the Justice and Equality Movement. The rebel groups, notably the SLM and the JEM, recruited primarily from the non-Arab Muslim Fur, Zagawa and Masalit ethnic groups. So the Janjaweed is the Arab militia. They are also Muslims. So Janjaweed is fighting against the Sudan Liberation Movement and the Justice and Equality Movement. The Janjaweed is comprised of the Arab tribes of the local region and the rebel groups, that is the Sudan Liberation Movement and the Justice and Equality Movement is comprised of the African ethnic tribal groups of the region, which include Fur. You have to remember, in fact, Darfur is derived from this tribe, Darfur, land of the Fur. So Darfur, Fur, Zagawa, and Masalit. So these are the three large ethnic groups that inhabit the Darfur region, and they are fighting against what is called Arab militias. So they are fighting against the Arab militias, and this fighting has been going on since the year 2003. Nearly 5 lakh, so 4.8 lakh people have been killed according to some estimates, and this is going on even to this date. So this is the place where Darfur is located. You can see here, this is the map of Sudan and this is the Red Sea. You can see Sudan is a very large country of Africa. It was split into two in 2011. In 2011, South Sudan was created as a new country. And this is the region called Darfur. Darfur is located in western Sudan, and there are three components within Darfur. One is North Darfur, this is South Darfur, and this is Western Darfur. So Darfur itself is divided into three components: North Darfur, South Darfur, and Western Darfur. So this is very important for you for the examination. So in the examination, you will be simply asked a question. So where is Darfur? So Darfur is in Sudan. And why is this in the news? Darfur is in the news because of a genocide committed by the Arab militias with the support of the government in exterminating the local African tribes. So local African tribes include Fur, Zakawa, and Masalit. So recently 60 people of the Masalit tribe have been killed by the Janjaweed or the Rapid Support Forces. The African Union and the United Nations have a joint peacekeeping mission in the region named UNAMID, so United Nations Mission in Darfur. However, it has not been that successful in bringing peace to this region. As of spring 2020, so as of this year, over 480,000 people have been killed, and more than 2.8 million people, that is 28 lakh people, have been displaced in Darfur. Sudan itself is going through a problematic situation. You must know something about Sudan. Since December 2018, there is a political crisis going on in Sudan, and this crisis is targeted at against one person called Omar al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir served as the president of Sudan for several decades, and he was forced to step down in the month of April 2019. So he was forced to step down, and since then there is a government which was formed, and this government comprised of both the military as well as the civil society. At present, Sudan is governed by the Sovereignty Council, which comprises of representatives from both the military as well as the civil society. Protests erupted against Omar al-Bashir, who was a dictator of Sudan, because of the high levels of corruption, unemployment, and the various economic problems in the region. So in 2019 August, a draft constitutional declaration was adopted. So the August 2019 draft constitutional declaration, signed by military and civilian representatives during the Sudanese revolution, requires a peace process leading to a peace agreement to be made in Darfur and other regions of armed conflict in Sudan within the first 6 months of the 39-month transition period to a democratic civilian government. So the August 2019 draft constitutional declaration says that peace talks must be initiated with all parties that are in conflict with the government. This includes the Darfuris, who are fighting against the government forces, that is the Rapid Support Forces. And this should be done within 6 months. So, though there has not been any peace agreement since then, efforts are being made to bring peace to this particular region. And the same constitutional declaration says that elections will be held in 2022. So government will be handed over to a civilian authority in 2022 following the elections in Sudan. So this is something which is factual information that may not be required for the examination, but you need to know that Sudan has gone through a serious political crisis in the recent period. And one more person, that, I mean, in February 2020, Sudan's rulers have agreed to hand over ex-president Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court to face genocide and war crime charges. So this is a very, very important development. Omar al-Bashir has become very notorious because he was the first serving head of the state who has been issued an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Courts. The ICC has issued an arrest warrant against this person, and he has evaded arrest since 2009. So this arrest warrant, if I'm not wrong, was issued in 2009, and he has evaded arrest, and he is required by the ICC on charges of genocide and war crimes. But after he was forced to step down as the president of Sudan, the new rulers of Sudan have agreed to hand over Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court, and this is one of the demands which is made by the Darfuris. Because of Omar al-Bashir, that Darfur has seen large-scale mass slaughter. So it is said that Omar al-Bashir was behind the mass slaughter of the Darfuris since 2003, and the Darfuris are demanding this person to be brought before the International Criminal Court. So Bashir is accused of serious crimes in a conflict that broke out in Darfur in 2003 and led to the deaths of more than 3 lakh people. Authorities said that the former president and others charged by the ICC should appear before the court. The commitment came at peace talks between Sudan government and the rebel groups from the Darfur region. So this is about Darfur. This is a very important topic, a small topic, but can be asked in the examination. So you must know that Darfur is a region that is located in Sudan. This region has been witness to a serious violence, which has resulted in the death of more than 4,80,000 people. On the one hand, we have the Arab militia, and on the other hand, we have the African groups that are fighting against each other. This fight is basically over the control of the local resources. This is actually a very poor region, and they are fighting against each other for control of the local resources. So this is about Darfur. This is a very important topic for your prelims examination. So let us move on to the next topic for today's class. This is about the Uyghurs. So who are these people called Uyghurs, and why are they often in the news? So there is something which you need to know regarding Uyghurs. So Uyghurs, so let us see why these people are in the news. So why are they in the news? So the United States has recently imposed sanctions on 3 senior officials of the Chinese Communist Party, including a member of the ruling Politburo, for alleged human rights abuses targeting ethnic and religious minorities in the western part of the country. So you must first know where these people are inhabited. So this is the region. So this province is called Xinjiang province. Xinjiang is the largest province of China, and this is the place where we see a group of people called Uyghurs. So Uyghurs inhabit one region called the Xinjiang province. Their population is said to be 1.1 crore or 11 million. And these people are culturally and ethnically closely related to the Central Asian people. So in Central Asia, we have 5 countries, that is Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So these people are a Turkic ethnic minority inhabiting the Xinjiang province since several centuries. So these people have been inhabiting this region, that is the Xinjiang province, for several centuries. And this region, that is the Xinjiang province, was occupied by the Chinese in the year 1949 when the Communist Revolution swept the entire country. So similarly, later they have also occupied Tibet. So Tibet was also occupied by the Chinese in 1949. You can see here, you can notice something interesting. So Xinjiang is the province which borders Ladakh. So that is the line of actual control, or the Aksai Chin, also has border with Xinjiang. So on the Chinese side of the line of actual control, we have the Xinjiang province. Okay, so this is the place where these people live. These people are called the Uyghurs, and they are a Turkic ethnic Muslim minority people which are closely related to the Central Asian republics. So the rest of China, which is comprised of the Han Chinese. So the rest of China is dominated by a group of people called Han Chinese. I am writing it here, Han Chinese. and they are significantly different. So they are these people, Han Chinese, are significantly different from the Uyghurs. So their culture is different, their language is different, and their traditions are also different. So Han Chinese, who dominate the rest of China, are significantly different from the Uyghurs culturally, ethnically, and linguistically. Uyghurs have their own language, which is called Uyghur language. So they speak a language called Uyghur language. And recently, there have been accusations that the Chinese are imposing Mandarin on these people. So they have been subjected to a lot of oppression by the Chinese government. Chinese government suspects that these people have secessionist tendencies. So they want to be a separate country. So secessionist tendencies are prevalent in these people. This is what the Chinese say, and they have oppressed the basic human rights of the Uyghurs. So the United States of America has acted very recently against the oppression of the Uyghurs by the Chinese government in Xinjiang, and they have imposed sanctions on higher officials of the Chinese government. So what have they done? So the United States of America has imposed sanctions on three officials. So they have imposed sanctions on three senior officials of the Chinese Communist Party, including a member of the ruling Politburo. So this is something which is very important. So they have imposed sanctions on the highest authorities of the Chinese government. So including a member of the ruling Politburo for alleged human rights abuses targeting ethnic and religious minorities in the western part of the country. So these sanctions have been imposed on these people because of the human rights abuses targeting the ethnic and religious minorities, that is the Uyghurs, in the western part of the country. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement that the United States will not stand idly by as the Chinese Communist Party carries out human rights abuses. So the United States will not stand idly by as the Chinese Communist Party carries out human rights abuses targeting Uyghurs. It is not just the Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs and members of other minority groups in Xinjiang to include. So, what is the oppression that is carried out on them? So, these people are forced to carry out forced labor, arbitrary mass detention, forced population control, and attempts to erase their Muslim faith and culture. So the human rights abuses that are carried out by the Chinese Communist Party on the Uyghurs include forced labor, arbitrary mass detention, forced population control, and attempts to erase the culture and the Muslim faith. As I've already told you, this is the largest province, Xinjiang, and this is the province where the Uyghurs live. The decision to bar three senior officials from entering the US is the latest in the series of actions Trump administration has taken against China as relations over the corona as relation against China as relations deteriorate over the coronavirus pandemic, human rights, Hong Kong, and trade. So, as you all know, USA is not having a good relationship with China in the recent period, especially after Donald Trump has taken office as the president of the United States of America. So, they have differed on a number of issues. Trade is one issue, Hong Kong is another issue on which both the countries have differed. Human rights abuses that are carried out in Tibet and Xinjiang is one issue. Taiwan is one issue where both countries have differed. Not just Taiwan, so they have recently accused each other on the coronavirus pandemic. And there is another area where both these countries differ, that is the South China Sea dispute. So, in the South China Sea, China has claimed a number of islands, and this is objected by the United States of America recently. So, there are a number of areas where both the Chinese and there is was 5G technology where both countries have differed. So, there are a number of areas where USA and China have differed, and these differences have led to a deterioration in the relations between the two largest economies of the world. The China has responded by the sanctions that have been imposed on three senior officials of China. They have stated that US action marked a serious interference in China's affairs and was deeply detrimental to bilateral relations. China objected to this action on the part of the United States of America and have stated that this marked an interference into the China's internal affairs and also was deeply detrimental to the bilateral relations. This is something which is important. But who are the Uyghurs? So I have already explained you briefly about the Uyghurs. So I have written something here. So the Uyghurs are mostly Muslim Turkic ethnic people who regard themselves as culturally and ethnically close to Central Asian nations. So the first sentence itself is very important. So the Muslims are mostly Muslim, sorry, the Uyghurs are mostly Muslim Turkic ethnic people who regard themselves as culturally and ethnically close to Central Asian nations. The majority live in Xinjiang, where they number about 11 million people. So there are as many as 1.1 crore Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province. So most of them live in the Xinjiang province. The region's economy has for centuries evolved around agriculture and trade. Towns there, such as Kashgar, thrived with the growth of the famous Silk Road trading route. Uyghurs are also found in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, and several thousands live in Australia. So, Uyghurs are not just found in China, they are also found in small numbers in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. They have their own language, which is called the Uyghur language, though China is accused of forcing them to learn Mandarin. In the early part of the 20th century, Uyghurs briefly declared independence, but the region was brought under the complete control of Communist China in 1949. Xinjiang is currently designated as an autonomous region within China, like Tibet to its south, but in reality, the province has little autonomy from the Chinese side. So, though it is termed as an autonomous region of China by the Chinese government, in reality, their autonomy is limited. Activists say that over the years, central government policies have gradually curtailed Uyghurs' religious, commercial, and cultural activities, as large number of majority Han Chinese have been encouraged to move to the region. So the Chinese government has adopted a policy under which the Han Chinese, who are a majority in the rest of China, are encouraged to move into the Xinjiang region, and this has brought them into conflict with the locals, that is the Uyghurs. The demography of the region has also changed significantly, and the Chinese government is behind the change in the demography of this region. Beijing is accused of intensifying its crackdown after street protests in Xinjiang in the 1990s and again in the run up to the Beijing Olympics in 2008. So there have been protests occasionally in this region. In 2009, in the capital of Xinjiang, that is Urumqi, nearly 200 people were killed in what China has called a terrorist attack. Most of the people who were killed were Han Chinese, and China sees the Uyghur movement as a secessionist movement, and whoever is suspected of being supportive of the separatist movement, that is the East Turkestan Islamic movement, is arrested and detained for an indefinitely long period. So the human rights activists have accused the central government for adopting policies which have curtailed the Uyghurs' religious, commercial, and cultural activities. In recent years, the Chinese government has detained an estimated 1 million people. So this is really unfortunate. So there are as many as 1 million people who have been detained and kept in what is called internment camps and prisons, where they are subjected to ideological discipline, which means they are forced to embrace the communist ideology. They are also forced to denounce their religion, language, and are also physically abused. So in recent years, the Chinese actions have become far more serious. As many as 10 lakh people have been arrested and detained in prisons, where they are subjected to ideological discipline, forced to denounce their religion and language, and physically abused. China has long suspected the Uyghurs, who are mostly Muslim, of harboring separatist tendencies because of their distinct culture, language, and religion. China always sees the Uyghurs with some suspicion because their language is different from the majority Chinese, and their culture and religion are also different. China officially atheist communist government at first denied the existence of internment camps. So when accused of arresting large number of Uyghurs and keeping them in internment camps, China initially denied the existence of internment camps in Xinjiang, but now says that they are occasional training facilities. So they gave a new interpretation to these prisons. They call these places as occasional training facilities aimed at countering Muslim radicalism and separatist tendencies. So these areas are aimed at countering Muslim radicalism and separatist tendencies. So in December last year, Xinjiang authorities announced that the camps had closed and all the detainees had graduated. a claim difficult to corroborate independently given tight surveillance and restrictions on reporting in the region. So there is a lot of restrictions on the media to report events that have happened in this region. Last month, that is in the month of June, Trump signed legislation. There was an act which was passed by the US Congress. This act is called the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act of 2020. So this is something which you need to remember. So Uyghur Act, Human Rights Policy Act of 2020. So this act has been passed. So last month, Trump signed legislation, that is the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act of 2020, passed with an overwhelming support from the Congress, mandating that individuals face sanctions for oppressing Uyghurs. The law also requires US businesses and individuals selling products to or operating in Xinjiang to ensure their activities don't contribute to human rights violations, including the use of forced labor. So this act requires the US government to impose sanctions on individuals who are responsible for the oppression of the Uyghurs. And it also requires US businesses and individuals operating in Xinjiang not to indulge in any human rights violations. So this is what the act is. So there is a movement, you have to remember this movement. This movement is called East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which has been launched by a section of Uyghurs. So the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which has been launched by a section of the Muslims. This is a terrorist movement and it is aimed at creating an independent homeland for the Uyghurs. And the US and other countries have designated this organization as a terrorist organization. So the East Turkestan Islamic Movement is a Muslim separatist group founded by militant Uyghurs, members of Turkic-speaking ethnic minority in the northwest China's Xinjiang province. So this is about the Uyghurs. So you must know who these people are, where do they live, and what is the problem that is faced by them, and why are they in the news? Why are they in the news? Why are the Uyghurs in the news in the very recent period? So you need to know all these points. So anything can be asked in the prelims examination. So now let us move on to the next topic. The next topic is also a very important topic for the examination. So this region has also been in a turmoil for past several years. In fact, the agitation which was started in 2019 continues to till this day. So what is this crisis going on in Hong Kong? So you must know something about the developments that have taken place in Hong Kong. First of all, you must know where Hong Kong is. You can see here, this is the map of China, and you can see here, this is where Hong Kong is located. So this is where Hong Kong is located. So you can expand this map, and this is the Hong Kong. So Hong Kong that we are talking about not just includes the Hong Kong island, it also includes the Kowloon Peninsula and the New Territories. So it is comprised of three components, that is the Hong Kong island, Kowloon Peninsula and the New Territories, so which have been occupied by the British in the 19th century. So let us see what is happening in Hong Kong. So in July 1997, so we have to go back to 1997. So in July 1997, as the flag of the United Kingdom was lowered over Hong Kong, the prosperous colony was returned to China after 150 years of British rule. So as this statement signifies, Hong Kong was under the British rule for as many as 150 years. So it came under the control of the British in 1841-42, and since then it was a British colony. It was returned to the Chinese in the year 1997. So on July 1st, 1997, Hong Kong was handed over to China by the United Kingdom. So we should know something about the history of Hong Kong. So how did it become a British colony? So the United Kingdom has long held Hong Kong as a colony since 1841, when it occupied the area during the First Opium War. So this is something important. The First Opium War, I think, has taken place in 1839. So these details are not important. I think it happened between 1839 and 1842. So after the First Opium War, the British got control over the Hong Kong island. So the United Kingdom held the Hong Kong island as a colony since 1841, when it occupied the area during the First Opium War. The war broke out after the Qing dynasty or Qing dynasty, Qing dynasty of China attempted to crack down an illegal opium trade. So this was called the Opium War because this aimed at curtailing the illegal opium trade in which the British were engaged. That has led to widespread addiction in China. So the war broke out after China attempted to crack down an illegal opium trade that led to widespread addiction in China. Defeat, however, came at a heavy cost. So the Chinese defeat came at a heavy cost. In 1842, China agreed to cede the island of Hong Kong to the British in perpetuity through the Treaty of Nanjing. So you have to remember this treaty. So according to the Treaty of Nanjing, Hong Kong was given to China. Hong Kong was given to the British in perpetuity, so permanently, by the Chinese following the first Opium War. So you need to remember these points. So the first Opium War ended with the Treaty of Nanjing, and according to the Treaty of Nanjing, Hong Kong was given to the British by the Chinese. Over the next half century, so over the next 50 years, that is from 1842, the United Kingdom gained control over all the three main regions of Hong Kong. So there are three main regions of Hong Kong. So what are these three regions? One is the Hong Kong Island. So the Hong Kong that we talk about today is not just about the Hong Kong Island. It includes three regions. So Hong Kong Island, Kowloon Peninsula, and the New Territories. So these three together form part of Hong Kong. You can see here in the map. So these are the three components of the Hong Kong region. So Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of China comprised of three territories. So over the next half century, the United Kingdom gained control over all the three regions of Hong Kong. After Hong Kong Island came the Kowloon Peninsula and finally the New Territories, a swath of land that comprises of bulk of the Hong Kong today. So the New Territories actually account for a majority of the Hong Kong region that is today. So these regions have been occupied by the British over the next 50 years from 1842. The final treaty, that is the 1898 Convention for the Extension of Hong Kong Territory, leased the new territories to Britain for 99 years. Under the terms of the treaty, China would regain control of the leased lands on July 1st, 1999. So why was Hong Kong handed over to China by the British on July 1st, 1999? So there is a history to this. So the final treaty, a treaty was signed between China and the British Empire in 1898. This treaty is called the Convention for the Extension of Hong Kong Territory, leased the new territories to Britain for 99 years. So under this treaty, which was signed between China and the British Empire, these territories which have been occupied by the British were extended or were given to the British for lease for 99 years. Under the terms of the treaty, China would regain control of its leased lands on July 1st, 1997. British Hong Kong's trajectory was different from that of the mainland China, which became a communist country in 1949. Hong Kong adopted a different path to development and China adopted a different path to development. China became a communist nation officially in the year 1949. Hong Kong, however, was a capitalist nation. It was a capitalist island under the British Empire. So during the Communist Revolution, as many as 1 lakh Chinese found refuge in Hong Kong after the Communist Party took over. Capitalist Hong Kong soon experienced an economic boom, becoming home to a multicultural international community. So Hong Kong as on today is a very developed region. It is one of the most important financial centers in the world. Apart from being a very important financial center, it is also a multicultural center having people from all countries of the world. So they adopted a different model of development compared to the mainland Chinese. So as the treaty's expiration loomed, separating the new territories from the rest of Hong Kong became increasingly unthinkable. Starting in the late 1970s, the UK and China began to discuss Hong Kong's future. So as you all know, Hong Kong was supposed to be handed, not the Hong Kong Island, but the other territories that the other territories that the British gained over the 50 years starting 1842, must be handed over back to the Chinese on July 1st, 1997. So as the date approached, there was a lot of tension among the people of Hong Kong on whether these territories will be handed over back to China or not. So, however, an agreement was signed between Britain and China in 1984. So, in 1984, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and China's Premier So Xiang signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, agreeing that China would give Hong Kong some political and social autonomy through a one country, two systems policy for a 50-year period. So, in 1984, a landmark agreement was signed between Britain and China. According to this agreement, Britain accepted the demand from China to hand over Hong Kong and the surrounding regions back to China, but China has accepted that Hong Kong and the new territories will have some political and social autonomy under this very important principle. So you can be asked this question in the examination. One country, two systems is a principle that is often heard in the news. Applies to which of the following territories? So one country, two systems principle is something which here when it comes to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong was handed over back to China by the British under this principle called one country, two systems. After the handover, Hong Kong became a special administrative region of China with its own mini constitution, legal system, and some democratic rights like free speech and the freedom of assembly under its basic law. So there is a law which governs Hong Kong as of today. This basic law is called the mini constitution, and according to the mini constitution, Hong Kong enjoys its own legal system which is different from the rest of China. It also enjoys some democratic rights like free speech and the freedom of assembly under its basic law. However, Hong Kong residents cannot elect their own leaders. Rather, a chief executive is elected by a 1200 member election committee. So there is no fair elections in Hong Kong. Whoever must be the chief executive of Hong Kong is vetted by the Chinese Communist Party government. So it is only with the approval of the Chinese government that a chief executive for Hong Kong will be appointed. So starting in 2014, elections were conducted using a list of candidates vetted by Beijing. That and other Chinese policies like a recent attempt to allow extradition to the mainland have led to mass protests that strained British-China diplomatic relations and fueled increasing concerns that China is stifling public dissent, interfering in local politics and eroding human rights in Hong Kong. So there has been a lot of tension over the past several years, especially since 2014. Last year, that is in 2019, tensions were very severe. China wanted to Hong Kong enacted one basic law called the extradition law, which allowed people of Hong Kong to be extradited to China. This law was opposed by the people of Hong Kong, and finally, this law had to be withdrawn after a series of protests. And during the process of the enacting the law and in the later stages, many people have expressed concerns that China is stifling public dissent. So, under the one country, two system philosophy, Hong Kong enjoyed some basic rights. So, but China is accused of suppressing these rights. So, China is accused of stifling public dissent, interfering in local politics, and eroding human rights in Hong Kong. So very recently, what is the issue? So very recently, China has passed what is called the Basic Security Law. So coming to 2020, so very recently, China has done something which is interesting. So China has passed a wide-ranging new security law for Hong Kong, which makes it easier to punish protesters and reduce the city's autonomy. So the purpose of this law, according to critics, is to punish protesters and to reduce the city autonomy. Critics have called this as the end of Hong Kong. So many human rights activists have said that this law is the end of Hong Kong. So they no longer enjoy the autonomy that was expected of Hong Kong because of the basic security law. So, but what is this law and what are the concerns that are expressed by the people of Hong Kong on this particular law? So Hong Kong was always meant to have its own security law but could never pass one because it was so unpopular. Under the basic law, I think Article 23 of the basic law requires Hong Kong to pass its own security law, but it was never passed because it was something unpopular among the citizens of Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is always meant, or Hong Kong was always meant to have a security law, but could not pass one because it was so unpopular. So this is about China stepping in to ensure that the city has a legal framework to deal with what it sees as a serious challenge to its authority. So since Hong Kong could not pass its own security law, the Chinese have stepped in and they have passed the security law for the autonomous region of Hong Kong. The details of the 66 articles, the details of the law's 66 articles were kept secret until after it was passed. Until after it was passed, the details have been kept secret. Now we come to know about the details. So what does this law say? So it actually criminalizes. So this is something which is important. You must remember. So the law criminalizes secession, that is breaking away from the country; subversion, it is undermining the power or authority of the central government; terrorism, using violence or intimidation against people; and collusion with foreign or external forces. So if a person indulges in any of these activities like secession, which is breaking away from the country; subversion, that is undermining the power or authority of the central government; terrorism, that is using violence or intimidation against people; or collusion with foreign or external forces. So such acts are treated as criminal acts, and an individual can be sentenced to life imprisonment under this particular security law. So when did it come effect? So we will look at the various features now. So the law came into effect at 23 local time on 30th June. So on 30th June, so one day before, so the 23rd anniversary of city's handover to China from the British rule, this law came into force. It gives Beijing powers to shape life in Hong Kong it has never had before. Critics say it effectively curtails protest and freedom of speech. China says it will return to stability. So critics say that this will stifle dissent. um, any protest of any form will be treated as secession or subversion, or any violence can be treated as terrorism by the Chinese government. However, China, on the other hand, says such a law is required to bring stability to Hong Kong, which was affected by a series of protests in 2019. The new law's the new law's key provisions include. So these are the key provisions of the law. So I'll be reading these key provisions. So crimes of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces are punishable by a maximum sentence of life in prison. So the maximum punishment that can be given for persons who indulge in such activities is life imprisonment. Damaging public transport facilities can be treated as terrorism. So damaging public transport facilities can be considered terrorism. Those found guilty will not be allowed to stand in public office. So those who have been found guilty of the above activities will not be allowed to stand for public office. So they cannot become the chief executive or members of the council in Hong Kong. Companies can be fined if convicted under the law. So if any company violates the law, they can be fined. Beijing will establish a new security office in Hong Kong with its own law enforcement personnel, neither of which would come under the local authorities' jurisdiction. So a new security office will be established by China in Hong Kong, and this will serve independent of the government of Hong Kong. So it will not come under the local authorities' jurisdiction. This office can send some cases to be tried in mainland China. This is something unfortunate. So some cases can be tried in China. So some people who have been arrested on various offenses can be tried in China. Though China says that only a tiny number of cases will be tried in China. In addition, Hong Kong will have to establish its own National Security Commission to enforce the laws with a Beijing appointed advisor. Hong Kong's chief executive will have the power to appoint judges to hear national security cases, raising fears about the judicial autonomy. Importantly, Beijing has the power over how the law should be interpreted, not any Hong Kong judicial or policy body. So this law basically gives a lot of power to China. So Hong Kong's chief executive, who works under the direction given by the Chinese government, will have the power to appoint judges to hear national security cases, raising fears about judicial autonomy. Importantly, Beijing will have power over how the law should be interpreted, not any Hong Kong judicial or policy body. policy body. If the law conflicts with any Hong Kong law, then the Beijing law shall take priority. Some trials will be heard behind closed doors. People suspected of breaking the law can be wiretapped and put under surveillance. Management of foreign national non-governmental organizations and news agencies will be strengthened. So management of foreign NGOs and news agencies will be strengthened. The law will also apply to non-permanent residents and people from outside Hong Kong who are not permanent residents of Hong Kong. So this just not applies to the Hong Kong residents, but whoever is residing in Hong Kong on a non-permanent basis. So why did China do this, or how can China do this? So Hong Kong, as you all know, was handed back to China from British control in 1997. But under a unique agreement, a mini constitution called the Basic Law and a so-called one country, two systems principle. So we have already discussed this point. They are supposed to protect certain freedoms for Hong Kong, like the freedom of assembly and speech, an independent judiciary, and some democratic rights, freedoms that no other part of China has. Under the same agreement, Hong Kong had to enact its own national security law. This was set out in Article 23 of the Basic Law. So Hong Kong was supposed to enact a national security law under Article 23, but this was not done till date. So when it was not done, then China has decided to enact the law. But can the China do something which should be done by Hong Kong? Yes, there is a provision in the Basic Law. So this is mentioned here. So many might ask how China can do this if the city was supposed to have freedoms guaranteed under the Handover Agreement. The Basic Law says Chinese laws can't be applied in Hong Kong unless they are listed in a section called Annex 3. So some Chinese laws can be applied to Hong Kong if they are listed in Annex 3. So if any Chinese law is listed in Annex 3, it can be applied in Hong Kong. So there are already a few laws that belong to the China, which have been added to Annex 3 of the Basic Law. But these laws till date have not been non-controversial. They are not controversial. But this law, that is the Basic Security Law, has also been added to Annex 3 of the Basic Law, and this actually has become a problem. So these laws can be introduced by decree, that is by force they can be introduced in Annex 3, which means to bypass the city's parliament. Critics say that the introduction of the law this way, that is by force, amounts to a breach of one country, two systems principle, which is so important to Hong Kong, but clearly it is technically possible to do so. China can technically do anything. China can apply all its laws to Hong Kong by including them in Annex 3. Though it is not a democratic process, they can do so. So some people say that China can't do such things by forcing or by ordering inclusion of laws by decree. But technically it is possible for China to do it. Since the law was enacted, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some other countries have suspended extradition treaties with Hong Kong, and UK has offered citizenship options to Hong Kong residents. So many countries have expressed apprehensions over the human rights violations that can take place in Hong Kong, and some countries have suspended their extradition treaties like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. UK has offered citizenship options to the residents of Hong Kong. Critics say the law makes it easier to punish protesters and critics of Chinese government. So whoever criticizes the Chinese government can be booked under the Basic Security Law henceforth. So Hong Kong government says that the law is required to bring order to a city that saw mass democracy protests last year that have often turned violent. So the Hong Kong government, on the other hand, says such a law is required to bring stability and order to the city, which has seen mass protests in 2019. So this is about the Hong Kong security law, which is very important for your prelims examination. I doubt whether it can be asked in the mains examination. Let us move on to the next topic for today's class. This will be International Tiger Day. As we have already discussed in the past, that international days may be asked in the civil service examination, so you need to be thorough as far as important international days are concerned. So in the recent period, we have come across the International Tiger Day. So we will see something about the International Tiger Day. So July 22nd is celebrated across the world as the International Tiger Day to raise awareness about the dwindling number of striped cats who are on the brink of extinction and to encourage tiger conservation. So July 29th is the International Tiger Day. This day is observed to raise awareness on the dwindling population of the tigers and also to create awareness on encouraging tiger conservation. So this day was declared as such in 2010. So International Tiger Day was created in 2010 at St. Petersburg Tiger Summit in Russia. In the summit, governments of tiger populated countries vowed to double tiger population by 2022. Almost a decade has passed since then. So in the International Tiger Summit, which was held in St. Petersburg, Russia, countries which had tiger population have vowed to double the population of tigers uh, by in a period of 10 years. So union minister, so very recently the government of India has released the tiger statistics. It is quite encouraging for us. So union minister for environment, forest and climate change, Prakash Javadekar, released the detailed status of tiger report 2018. According to the report released on the eve of the global tiger day, tigers were observed to be increasing at a rate of 6% per annum in India from 2006 to 2018. So this is a very encouraging development. So the tiger population is increasing in India at a rate of 6% per annum. This is what the global status or status of tiger report 2018 says. So earlier we used to have 9 tiger reserves under Project Tiger. Now we have 50 tiger reserves. So there were 9 tiger reserves when Project Tiger started in 1973. Now India has 50 tiger reserves with 2,967. Just hold on. So 2,967 tigers. So the number of tigers in India according to the status of tiger report is 2,967. And you must know some other facts. 70% of the world tigers are in India, and the conservation effort has been a huge success. So India's efforts to conserve the striped cat population has been a very big success. So according to the report on the condition of 50 tiger reserves, Madhya Pradesh has the maximum number of tigers followed by Karnataka. So this is also important. The state which has the highest number of tigers in India is Madhya Pradesh. The state which has the highest number of tigers is Madhya Pradesh. It is followed by Karnataka, and the tiger reserve which has the highest number of tigers is the Corbett Tiger Reserve. Not just that, it also has the highest tiger density. So Uttarakhand's Jim Corbett Tiger Reserve has reported the highest tiger density among India's 50 tiger reserves. The density is 14 tigers per 100 square kilometers. This Corbett Tiger Reserve is followed by Kaziranga, Nagarhole and Orang Tiger Reserves according to the status of tigers, co-predators and prey in India report released recently. So this report is called actually the status of tigers, co-predators and prey in India. So which tiger reserve? So as I've already told you, Corbett Tiger Reserve has the highest number of tigers, followed by Nagarhole Tiger Reserve in Karnataka. This is followed by Bandipur Tiger Reserve and Bandhavgarh and Kaziranga. So you must know where these tiger reserves are located. This is very important for your examination. So India accounts for nearly 70% of the tiger population in the world. Project Tiger, which has been launched to save the tiger population, has been a huge success. It started with 9 tiger reserves and now we have 50 tiger reserves. Madhya Pradesh is the state which has the highest number of tigers, followed by Karnataka, and Jim Corbett Tiger Reserve has the highest number of tigers. In addition to that, it also has the highest density of tigers, that is 14 per 100 square kilometers. This is something which you need to remember. Questions can be asked in the examination. Then we always come across this topic called tiger reserve. So what do you mean by a tiger reserve? You can be asked a question in the prelims examination on tiger reserves. First of all, Project Tiger was launched by the government of India in the year 1973 to save the endangered species of tiger in the country. So Project Tiger, as you all know, is a hugely successful project which was launched in 1973 to save the tiger population. It was initially launched with 9 tiger reserves, but as of now we have 50 tiger reserves, and these 50 tiger reserves cover an area of as much as 71,000 square kilometers. So, but what is a tiger reserve and what are the important components of a tiger reserve? So, a tiger reserve is something like a national park or a wildlife sanctuary. So here you have a definition. So a national park or wildlife sanctuary that is considered significant for protecting tigers can be additionally designated as a tiger reserve. So tiger reserves are nothing but national parks or wildlife sanctuaries, but they are considered significant for protecting the tiger population. So a national park or wildlife sanctuary that is considered significant for protecting tigers can be additionally designated as a tiger reserve. And for a tiger reserve, there are two components. So a tiger reserve consists of a core or a critical tiger habitat, which is to be managed as an inviolable area or an inviolate area, and a buffer zone or a peripheral area immediately abutting the core zone, which should be accorded a lesser degree of habitat protection. This is the typical zonation of a tiger reserve. So tiger reserve usually have two components: the core area, which is protected significantly, and there is a buffer zone. The buffer zone is also called the peripheral area, where the level of protection is a bit less. So there is a high level of protection in the core zone, and surrounding the core zone we have the buffer zone, where the level of protection is a bit less. So this is what you need to know about the tiger reserve. So there are 50 tiger reserves in India, uh, and these reserves are either national parks or wildlife sanctuaries and are considered significant for protecting tigers. Every tiger reserve has two components, that is the core zone and the buffer zone. Core zone enjoys a high level of protection and the buffer zone enjoys a lesser degree of habitat protection. So these are the 50 tiger reserves of India. So you have to please go through these 50 tiger reserves. They are very important for your examination. So you can see here Nagarjuna Sagar Srisailam is the largest tiger reserve of India. So it covers as much as 3,296 square kilometers. So these are the 50 tiger reserves. So for your convenience, I have added the 50 tiger reserves. So please go through them. You can be asked questions in the examination. So you can see that tiger reserves are spread over several states. Then we will move on to, okay, there is one more point which I would like to tell. So there is an authority called the National Tiger Conservation Authority. The National Tiger Conservation Authority was established for the protection of the tiger population, and it was established in 2005 and was granted statutory status under the Wildlife Protection Act in 2006. So this is a small point which you need to remember. So the National Tiger Conservation Authority is a statutory body of the ministry with an overarching supervisory coordinatory role performing functions as provided in the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. The NTCA was launched in 2005 following the recommendations of the Tiger Task Force. It was given statutory status by 2006 amendment of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So this is something which you need to note. So this is about the International Tiger Day and the Tiger Reserve. So please go through these 50 tiger reserves. They can be asked in the examination, so very important. Then there is a mission that has been in the news. So this is a very important topic for your exam, especially this year's prelims examination. So in the prelims examination, you can expect questions on developments. So this is a commonly asked question in the prelims examination and also the mains. Developments in the field of space research and defense research. So this is a very important topic. So developments in the field of space research and defense research is a commonly asked question in the examination. Important developments have taken place in the field of space research very recently. So what are these developments and why are they important? So in recent days, we have seen several missions which have been launched to the Mars. So that is something which is very important. So interplanetary expeditions have been launched by 3 countries. So we will see those 3 missions and we will also study the features of these missions. So first mission to be launched is HOPE mission. So what is HOPE mission? Who has launched this mission and what is the objective of this mission? This is what you need to know. So in the early mornings of July 20th on Tanegashima, a small island just off the coast of Kyushu, Japan, a 174-foot rocket, that is H2A. So the name of the rocket that lifted HOPE mission is H2A. You have to remember this. H2A is a rocket developed by Japan and this lifted the HOPE spacecraft into the space. So in the early mornings of July 20th on Tanegashima, a small island just off the southern coast of Kyushu, Japan, a 174-foot rocket H2A roared to life and lifted a spacecraft on the first leg of a 306-mile journey to Mars. So this is on its journey to Mars, and it was lifted by the H2A rocket. So there are two things which you need to remember. The name of the spacecraft or the name of the mission can be called Hope, or it is also called Al Amal. Al Amal is the name given by UAE, and the rocket that has carried is H2A, and this is developed by Japan. So the spacecraft itself, however, is not Japanese. Called Al Amal or Hope, it was designed and managed by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center in the United Arab Emirates. So this is a mission of the United Arab Emirates. So very important point. So it is very rare that we see developments in the field of space research coming from an Arab country. So the spacecraft itself, however, is not Japanese. Called Al Amal or Hope, it was designed and managed by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center in the United Arab Emirates. So this is a very important point that you need to note. Safely separated now from the Japanese rocket, so it has been separated from the Japanese rocket. The probe will fire its own thrusters to leave the Earth's orbit for Mars in about 28 days, arriving in February 2021 to complete the first interplanetary voyage initiated by an Arab country. So this mission is expected to reach the orbit of Mars in February 2021. So it is expected to reach the orbit of Mars in February 2021, and it is the first interplanetary expedition from an Arab country. So this is very important for the prelims examination. So it has been safely separated now from the rocket, and it is on its way to Mars. Hope's arrival. So this mission is expected to arrive in February 2021, and this happens to be the 50th anniversary of the UAE's formation. So the UAE will be celebrating its 50th Independence Day, and Hope mission will be coinciding with the Independence Day of the United Arab Emirates. So this is a pictorial representation of the Hope mission. So for your understanding, I have given an image of Hope. The UAE has limited experience of designing and manufacturing spacecraft, and yet here it is attempting something only 4 countries have done successfully till date. So the UAE has limited experience of designing and manufacturing spacecraft. So this is very important. UAE is not an expert in the field of space research, but it is attempting to do something which only 4 space agencies have successfully done. So only 4 countries have successfully launched missions to Mars. So these are USA, then Russia, and Europe, and India. So there are only 4 countries which have successfully launched missions to Mars, and USA is the only country which has long-running missions operating successfully in Mars. So though the other countries have launched missions to Mars, they are not long-running missions. So India, however, has not landed a mission on Mars. The other 2 countries, that is Russia and the European Space Agencies, have landed missions on Mars, but they could not succeed later. So they were aborted after they were landed on Mars. So UAE is doing something that is very interesting and very exciting. So 2 other spacefaring nations are also taking part of launching missions to Mars. So there are 2 other countries which are also involved in launching missions to Mars in this period. So they have already launched missions. So USA and China have launched missions to Mars. So NASA's flagship rover Perseverance and the Chinese Tianwen-1 lander and a small rover have been launched to Mars and are expected to arrive around the same time. So they are also expected to arrive in the month of February in Mars. So this is very important for you. So Hope is a mission to Mars launched by the United Arab Emirates. And what is the objective of Hope? So you must know this small point. So what is the objective and what is the duration of this mission? So Hope has the objective of studying the atmosphere and weather patterns of the planet. So its primary mission will last 680 days, 687 days. That is 1 year for Mars. So its mission will last for 687 days. That is 1 year. And this mission aims at studying the atmosphere and weather patterns of the planet. But the mission also reflects a broader ambition in the United Arab Emirates to drive innovation in science and technology and diversify the economy of the tiny but oil-rich nation. So by launching this mission, UAE wants to generate interest among its youth and the children in the field of science and technology and diversify its economy. For Emirati scientists and political leaders, the mission represents a new chapter for a part of the world with a rich history of scientific discovery. As you all know, the Arab world was known for several scientific discoveries during the early part of the medieval period, but of late they are not known for any major scientific discovery. So this is an attempt being made by United Arab Emirates to revisit their past and reignite interest in science and technology. So this is about the Hope mission. So I hope you do remember this mission. So Hope mission is followed by another mission to Mars. This mission is called Tianwen mission. So Tianwen is the Chinese mission to Mars, and it was also launched very recently. So let us see the features of this mission. So China's first Mars probe is called Tianwen 1, which was initially called Huoxing 1, but now it is called Tianwen 1. So Tianwen 1 means questions to heaven. So China's first Mars probe is called Tianwen 1, that is questions to heaven. The spacecraft consists of, this is interesting, you need to remember. So it not just consists of the orbiter. So Hope mission is just an orbiter mission, but Tianwen includes an orbiter which orbits the planet of Mars. It also lands on Mars, and there will be a vehicle which will be released by the lander, and it will move on the surface of Mars. So it includes three components: orbiter, lander, and rover. So this is a very important mission. So China's first Mars probe is called Tianwen. The spacecraft consists of an orbiter, lander, and a rover, and the mission aims to study the thickness and the sublayer distribution of the Martian soil. So this mission aims at studying the thickness of the soil in Mars and also the sublayer distribution of the Martian soil. The six-wheeled robot encapsulated in a protective probe was lifted off Earth by Long March 5 rocket from the Wenchang spaceport on Hainan Island. So this is something which you need to remember. So this has been launched from Hainan Island, and it was launched by this launch vehicle. The name of the launch vehicle is Long March 5. So this is something which you need to remember. Long March 5 is the rocket that has lifted Tianwen 1, and it was lifted from the Hainan Island. So it should arrive in orbit around the red planet in February. So around the same time when Hope mission also arrives in the orbit of Mars. The rover won't actually try to land on the surface for a further 2 to 3 months. However, it will not immediately land on the surface of the Mars. So it should arrive. So though the mission arrives in the orbit of Mars in the month of February, it will explore Mars from the atmosphere for 2 or 3 months. So this wait and see strategy was successfully used by the American Viking landers in the 1970s. So USA adopted a similar strategy. They explored the surface of the Mars from the atmosphere, and they have found a perfect landing site, and they could land successfully on Mars. Similar is the strategy of Tianwen 1. So this wait and see strategy was used successfully by the American Viking landers in the 1970s. It will allow engineers to assess the atmospheric conditions on Mars before attempting what will be a hazardous descent. So this is a very tricky mission. So before descending onto the surface of Mars, so they will explore the conditions, the atmospheric conditions, and they will land on the surface of the Mars. So Tianwen's Long March rocket made a picture perfect getaway in a brilliant sunshine. The targeted touchdown location for the Chinese mission will be a flat plain with the Utopia impact basin just north of Mars's equator. So it is trying to make a landing just to the north of the Mars's equator. So this is also something which you need to note. So this is a picture of Tianwen 1. So you can see here there is a big mast which will take pictures at a height. So this is the picture of Tianwen 1. So this is the lander. So the rover will study. So a rover is a vehicle which moves on a planetary surface. So the rover will study the region's geology at and just below the surface. Tianwen 1 looks a lot like NASA's Spirit and Opportunity rovers from the 2000s. It weighs some 240 kgs and is powered by fold out solar panels. So it is powered by solar panels, and it weighs around 240 kgs, and it looks similar to um, these two rovers that have been launched by the United States of America. A tall mast carries cameras to take pictures and aid navigation. Five additional instruments will help assess the mineralogy of local rocks and look for any water ice. So it will also explore for the presence of mineral rocks and also water ice. This surface investigation is really only half the mission. The other half, however, is carried out by the orbiter. So it is the orbiter which takes pictures of Mars, and these will be sent to the Chinese National Space Agency for further analysis. This is not the first attempt that China has made to explore Mars. So in 2011, they have launched a mission, and this mission has failed. This mission is called Xinhua. I think I have pronounced it correctly. Xinhua 1 was launched in November, I think November 8, 2011. And it was launched using a Russian launch vehicle. However, it was a failure. It could not reach the orbit of Mars. So the historic statistics for the exploration of the red planet are well known. About a half of all ventures have failed. Indeed, China's first effort to send a satellite Xinhua 1 to the dusty world stalled in Earth's orbit when its Russian carrier stage failed and fell back towards the Pacific Ocean. So it failed in the initial stages itself. So far, this is a very important point which you need to note. So far, only the Americans have managed to run long-lived operations on Mars. So only the Americans have successfully operated long-duration missions on Mars. So the Soviets Mars 3 and Europe's Beagle 2 missions got down but failed shortly after. So though they have successfully landed on the Martian surface, they failed immediately after landing. But America has several missions that are operating successfully on the Martian surface. China, however, can take confidence from a recent mission which they have launched. So this is also a very important mission, Chang 4. Or this is a mission which has been launched by China to explore the moon, and it happened, I think, last year. And it also included a rover. It also included a rover called U2, and China can take the experience from this mission and can deploy that experience in the Mars mission. So this is something which is exciting. So China, however, can take confidence from the successes of its two recent Chang 4 U2 lunar rovers, and the second of which made the first ever soft landing on the far side of the moon last year. So Chang 4 has made a soft landing on the far side of the moon last year. So this is about Tianwen 1. So this is the basic information that you need to know. Questions if asked will be asked mostly in the prelims examination. You need to know what is the launch vehicle used, where has been it launched, what is the name of the mission, is this the first mission or is this the second mission, etc., etc. All information is available in these slides. Then we will move on to the most important of the three missions, that is Perseverance. So Perseverance is a mission of the United States of America, and it was the third mission which was launched to Mars very recently, and this is said to be the most challenging of all the three missions. So this mission aims at finding out whether there is any life on the red planet. So on 30th July, at 7:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, NASA launched its fifth rover to Mars, and with it started a mission that may provide a conclusive answer to the questions. This mission aims at providing a conclusive answer to the question, has there ever been life on the red planet? So, has there ever been life on the red planet? The rover is called Perseverance. So, the vehicle that moves on the surface is called Perseverance. You can see the image of Perseverance here. So, this is called Perseverance. The rover is called Perseverance, and it is modeled after the Curiosity. So, Curiosity was launched successfully in 2012. So, the rover is called Perseverance and is modeled after the Curiosity, which landed on the Mars in 2012. Like a new model year car, Perseverance comes with many upgrades. It can travel faster, farther, and around more obstacles on the Martian surface than Curiosity can. It has improved autonomous driving and more resilient wheels. It has a drone helicopter aboard called Ingenuity. So this is very, very important. It also has carried a drone helicopter. So this is for the first time that a helicopter is being carried to Mars. and this helicopter will take pictures and it will fly over the Mars. So it has a drone helicopter aboard called Ingenuity, which will become the first aircraft to fly on another planet. Previous rover missions have been launched in pursuit of the question, was Mars ever hospitable? So previous missions actually had this question in mind, was Mars ever hospitable to life? They found it was. So they found that it was hospitable for life. They found that it was with water once on the surface and organic chemicals in the environment. This endeavor is going to go for the ultimate question: can it find evidence of actual microbial life frozen in time on the Martian surface? So, whether there is any life that is left on the surface or whether there has been any life in the past will be examined by this particular mission called Perseverance. Perseverance is going to drill into Mars and collect samples of rocks that may contain evidence of ancient life. So this is very important. So it will drill holes onto Martian surface and it will collect samples of rocks, and these samples will be brought back by the next mission. So NASA plans to launch the next mission in the 2020s, and these samples which are collected by Perseverance will be brought back by that next mission to Earth. So this is an even more audacious task. So more audacious though is the follow-up plan. A future mission will recover those samples from Mars and return them to Earth. Curiosity landed in Gale crater. So where did the Curiosity land? It landed on the Gale crater, a dried up ancient lake bed. Perseverance is going to a location named or called Jezero crater. Jezero. So Jezero crater is the name of the place where Perseverance will land, and it is an ancient river delta, and the terrain is little more treacherous than Gale, but the rewards may be richer. So it may be treacherous, but the rewards may be very high. So this is about the Perseverance mission. This is very important for your exam. So try to find out more details on Perseverance. A question can be asked in this year's prelims examination on Perseverance mission. So three missions have been launched. All these three missions have been successful, at least till now. All are expected to reach the Martian orbit in the month of February, and every mission has got its own objective. Perseverance is the most technologically advanced mission, and you need to know more details about Perseverance mission. Let us move on to the next topic. Next topic is Boko Haram. So what is this Boko Haram and why is this in the news? So this is also a very important topic, and as I have told you, this is also a topic that is a potential prelims question. So this is a topic which forms part of prelims examination, and it is international terrorist organizations. So there are a number of terrorist organizations active in several countries of the world. One of the most dreaded terrorist organizations in the world is Boko Haram. So they have been in the news. So they are often in the news, but recently they have been in the news because they killed some 16 people who are inside a camp in northern Cameroon. So fighters from the Boko Haram armed group have killed at least 16 people in an attack on a camp for displaced people in northern Cameroon. So Boko Haram is a terrorist organization which is based in Nigeria. So this is something which is very, very important. A question can be asked. So where do we hear about Boko Haram? So Boko Haram is a terrorist organization which is primarily concentrated in northeast Nigeria. This organization has carried out a number of attacks on the government of Nigeria. So they have been engaged in a fight with the Nigerian armed forces. So recently they have killed some 16 people who are living in a refugee camp in Cameroon. So fighters from Boko Haram have killed at least 16 people in an attack on an armed camp, on a camp for displaced people in northern Cameroon. The assailants in the early hours recently threw a grenade into a group of sleeping people inside a camp home to 800 people. So this camp is home to as many as 800 people, and they have thrown grenades onto this camp, and this resulted in the death of 16 people. So, but what is this Boko Haram and when was it established? So there is a long history to this particular organization. It was established way back in the year 2002. So let us see something about this organization. The group's official name is Jamatu Ahli Sunnah Lidawati Wal Jihad. So this is a very lengthy name of this organization. The group's official name is Jamatu Ahli Sunnah Lidawati Wal Jihad, which in Arabic means people committed to the propagation of the Prophet's teachings and jihad. So this meaning translates into people committed to the propagation of the Prophet's teaching and jihad. So this is very important. The residents of the city of Maiduguri. So Maiduguri is the place in which this organization was established initially. So Boko Haram was established in 2002 at this place. So the residents of Maiduguri call this organization as Boko Haram. So the residents have given this organization this name, that is Boko Haram. Loosely translated from the region's Hausa language, this means Western education is forbidden. So, what does Boko Haram mean? So, Boko Haram means Western education is banned or forbidden. So, this is the purpose with which it was established initially. So, Boko Haram means Western education is forbidden. Founded by Muhammad Yusuf in 2002, the group is now led by Abu Bakr Shekau. So this group is led by this person called Abu Bakr Shekau. You need to remember this name. But it was founded by Muhammad Yusuf in 2002. These people are known to carry out deadly attacks in surrounding countries like Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. So this is the place where the recent attack has taken place. So this is a small village in Cameroon, Guetchiwe. This is the name of the village, and this is the place where some 16 people have been killed. You can see here, this is Nigeria, and this is the place where the attack has taken place. So this is a bordering village. You can see here, this is Nigeria. This is the place where, this is the country where Boko Haram is primarily concentrated. There are other countries where they carry out attacks. One is Niger, the other is Chad, and the third is Cameroon. So these three countries often become targets to Boko Haram. But Nigeria has been successful in eliminating the threat of Boko Haram. They are now just confined to Borno state. So there is a state called Borno state. It is located in the northeastern part. So Borno state, located in the northeastern part of Nigeria, is the place where most of these Boko Haram fighters are concentrated. So Borno has been the epicenter of the Islamist group Boko Haram since it began its insurgency in 2009. So what are the various developments that have taken place since 2002? So I have given you here the brief. So initially it was established to oppose Western education. Later it became a military organization and started launching attacks on schools, colleges, and government institutions. It was designated as a terrorist organization by the United States of America in 2013. It declared a caliphate in areas it controlled in 2014, and it swore allegiance to Islamic State. So it has accepted the caliphate which has been established by the Islamic State and swore allegiance to that. Most of the territory that was earlier in the control of Boko Haram has been recaptured by the army, but now and then Boko Haram indulges itself into deadly terror attacks. So it draws its fighters mainly from the Kanuri ethnic group. So this is the group from which most of the fighters of Boko Haram come from. So it draws its fighters mostly from the Kanuri ethnic group, which is the largest in the three states. Most Kanuris have distinct facial scars, and when added to their heavy Hausa accent, they are easily identifiable to other Nigerians. So this is something which is not that important, but I have given you basic information. So when you hear about Boko Haram, you should remember that this is a dreaded terrorist organization, primarily based in Nigeria. There is one more organization, a deadly terrorist organization, which is very active in Africa. This is called Al Shabaab. Al Shabaab is a dreaded terrorist organization in Somalia. This is also very important. You can also expect questions on Al Shabaab. So Al Shabaab is a dreaded terrorist organization in Somalia, and Boko Haram is a dreaded terrorist organization in Nigeria. So these are the topics for today's class. So please follow me on Telegram. So my Telegram channel. So please join this Telegram channel, Rajashekara Reddy. Rajashekara is one word, Reddy is one word. and UPSC. So 3 words. Rajasekhara Reddy UPSC. This is my Telegram channel. You can join this Telegram channel for material. So if you want this material, please join this Telegram channel. So this is the 9th lecture in the series Top 200. So please watch the previous lectures. So we have finished 50 topics successfully. So there are still 150 topics left. So please go through the file. So and if you want the material, so please message me in this Telegram channel. You can call me at this number 76739399090. So for any clarifications, and please use this code RRUPSC. So RRUPSC is my code. So when you download and subscribe to the Unacademy Learning app, so please use this code. You will get an additional 10% discount. If you like the video, please like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the Unacademy's Let's Crack UPSC CS English channel. So thank you and have a very good day.